you can play with that. And notice it's rapidly advancing, scaring some people to death over what it might do in changing our society, right? So if you think, well, wait a minute, as a student learning how to write essays, I'm kind of like these computers being taught a particular algorithm of how to get data or input and arrange it in a certain way. I have an essay, right? So in a sense, you could think of yourself as learning to become the kind of computer program that is doing what ChatGPT does. And of course, what we know is the more of these essays you write, the better you get at it. You know, and eventually you get, you know, I have friends that write very boring things that have to be written for businesses. You know, every week or so they have to do a report. They have to gather the data, put it together in a certain framework, and pump it out for the company. By the way, they get lots of money for this, because that's a very skilled activity, right, to do that. And now the thing is, could ChatGPT replace them? It might. Those are the kinds of jobs that actually might be replaceable with that. So it's actually a fascinating insight into the nature of what we do and how we're using speech and text, and all of that comes from this. The so-called Sokal affair is kind of fascinating. Have you all found her videos? You could find, some of you have mentioned her videos in papers, so I'm assuming you know. If you want to find her, she's pretty good. Speaking of writing, remember the term papers theoretically are due tonight. I've had a couple of folks email me and ask permission to extend their time. I always say yes, although remember, if I don't get them in time for when the grades are due, I always want to turn my grades in on time, because I don't want to be the ones, you know, every year they have faculty lined up in the quad and they shoot them because their grades are in late, and I've never been shot. So just so you know. Remember, when I was in the Army, the most dangerous thing I ever did was drive on the Glen Highway, and I still do that. And I never got an award for that either. You know, the Army gave me all kinds of awards for silly stuff, but they never gave me any for the serious stuff. It's just, you know, getting to work. So the term papers due tonight. Hopefully you won't give me everything all on the last day, because I do read these things, and you know, you should see me after a couple of shots of reading essays and trying to grade these. And the third exam, notice everyone has been saying my links don't work. Aha, here's one that works. Sometimes when you do these, by the way, the process of creating the web page leads the links so that it looks like I have the right link there, but when you click on it, it doesn't actually go there. So this is the final test. We discussed how Hume argued that metaphysics is not possible. We talked about how all you could do is know the phenomena that's occurring at the moment, and when we hypothesize that something else is consistent or persistent over time, it's not provable, and so therefore cause and effect is not provable, and also the idea that we can describe the basis of everything in metaphysics is certainly not possible, according to Hume. Kant responds to this by arguing, well, Hume is right, but we can transcend this dilemma, transcend this issue, and figure out what must be the case in order for phenomena to exist and to be experienced. There has to be an experiencer. There has to be something that's causing the phenomena, and there's always going to be time involved. There's always going to be space. There's always going to be quantity, quality, and so on and so forth. And so we end up then trying to figure out, well, what structures that? Is that the nature of the human body that does that? Certainly the nature of the human body is an important part of any of that structuring aspect, but is that the only thing? No, there must be other things involved, and so on. And so modern psychology, in my mind, is certainly kind of blossoming under this, trying to figure out what creates all of this, Freud and all of those. And then describe how Hegel's concept of spirit is related to sociology. With Hegel, we end up with an organic view instead of a mechanistic view, and all of the attempts to understand the nature of what structures this gets more complex because it spreads out into not just our biology, but also into our language, into our culture, into the way languages structure how we perceive the world in our concepts, and so on and so forth. And that leads us to think about the sociological nature of reason. What we think of as reason, or what we think of as rationality, is embedded in a society, and like Bruno Latour tells us, it's networked, and that whole society basically is voting on what they believe to be true. And as a result of that gradually, dialectically evolving set of concepts, societies dynamically change what they believe. Truth changes over time from the perspective of the people themselves. They vote on it. Very democratic way of thinking about how this all happens, by the way. Remember, Thomas Kuhn also wrote about the structure of scientific revolutions and how human those kinds of developments in science are concerned. And by the way, if you're watching the movie Oppenheimer, you're looking at a network in practice. Why did Oppenheimer end up being the head of the center of the Manhattan Project? Was because, of course, he seemed to know everybody. And he was also a good teacher, and even though he was terrible in a lab, he was going to be an administrator, and he was apparently already a good administrator. And so they hired him to basically pick the people that were going to have to be involved in the Manhattan Project. And he knew exactly who he needed. He knew exactly who would be good to fill in the necessary parts of the stages of developing the bomb and all that sort of thing. Even the wives were the most brilliant people there sometimes, who ended up being secretaries for the project. I got a Harvard degree, says the one young lady, but I never learned how to type. So she doesn't know how to type. But, oh well. So it's networking and sociological. What is the relationship between pragmatism and American culture? Well, gee, you could probably have answered that even without taking the course, I suppose. It seems pretty obvious. Describe how existentialism or Marxism was a reaction to Hegel. For folks that send me their thoughts on that, I usually just point out, well, they are reactionary, but I also think they're dismal failures. Existentialism especially failed because it just made people depressed, because they accepted that meta-narratives were not believable anymore. That's the crisis of postmodernism. Meta-narratives are no longer believable. And the thing is, once you take those away, you basically take the operating system out of the human. And now why am I here? What was I made for? Right? If we update that to our Barbie movie, right? What was I made for? My goodness. Existentialism is a failure as a way of life, I think. Of course, the French obviously continue to exist. There you go. But lots of problems. And Marxism, not only can we see that was a dismal failure, I have an interesting approach to solving that. We're not solving it, but oops.
You're a strange Marxist to have that discussion. And, well, but here's why. This is not an insult, but it's just an explanation. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I was looking at your work was that well, first of all, you're a character, and that's an interesting thing. Like is this an insult? It's not an insult. It's a sign of originality. And it's a sign of a certain amount of moral courage, and it's a sign of a certain temperament, and it makes you humorous and charismatic and attractive, and I think you appeal to young people the way that outside intellectual rebels appeal to young people, and so those are all positive things that can be used positively or negatively. And my question is, it seems to me that your reputation, unless I'm very misinformed about this, is as a strong supporter of Marxist doctrines on the left, or was that. And so then my question is, given the originality of your thought, why is it that you came to presume at some point in your life, perhaps not now and perhaps still, that the promotion of Marxism rather than Zizekism was appropriate? Because it seems to me that there's enough originality in your body of thought and lateral thinking in the manner in which you approach intellectual ideas that there's just no reason for you to be allied with a doctrine that's 170 years old and that is, if capitalism is rife with problems, is twice as rife with problems as that. And so you're kind of a mystery to me in that way. And so that's my question.
Okay. Very briefly, I developed systematically in my books critical insights into many traditional Marxist theses, so no doubt here. You know what I still admire nonetheless in Marx? Not those simplicities of Communist Manifesto, but I still think that his so-called critique of political economy, capital, and so on, is a tremendous achievement as a description of the dynamics of capitalist society. And if you read it closely, Marx is much more ambiguous and open there. For example, he mentions, apropos what you referred to, he mentions that law of diminishing return, like white crisis will arrive necessarily, poorer getting poorer. But then he is honest enough to enumerate 7 or 8 counter tendencies. And if you read him closely, you will see that precisely those tendencies prevailed later. Or forget Communist Manifesto, go to read his political analysis of its unsurpassable 18 Primaire and so on of the 1848 revolution, which are incredibly complex, no traces of that class binary there. Marx deals with middle classes with crucial, lumpenproletariat with the ambiguous role of intellectuals and so on and so on. But basically, what I was pleading for, and I like to put it in paradoxical term, was for a return from Marx back to Hegel. I define myself more as a Hegelian. Why? Hegel is considered a madman, the guy, absolute knowing, and so on and so on. No, Hegel is much more modest and open. The danger in Marxism is for me this teleological structure. We are at the 0 point, but there is a unique chance of a reversal into a new emancipated society and so on. And the danger here is that of self-instrumentalization. Proletarian Communist Party is an agent of history which knows the laws of history to put it, follows them, and so on. That's the catastrophe. In Hegel, such a position is strictly prohibited. In Hegel, whenever you act, you earn. So, you know,